And now we have come to chapter 40, and I would need to caution you that perhaps we will be reading in the remaining chapters of Ezekiel. What we will be reading may not really make much sense unless you put it down on paper. Because Solomon's temple was a complex structure, and Ezekiel chapter 40 through 48 is a tour of the temple. So here is in chapter 40 we will have the first part of that tour. Verse 1. In the 25th year of our captivity, at the beginning of the year, on the 10th day of the month, in the 14th year after the city was captured, on the very same day the hand of the Lord was upon me, and he took me there. So you see the time frame in this verse is around 571 before Christ. In other words, it was 14 years after Jerusalem had been destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar's forces. Because you see, Ezekiel had been taken captive quite some time before that. So this is about 14 years after the fall of Jerusalem. Also, we have read that it says, at the beginning of the year. Now we know from God's point of view, the beginning of the year is spring. However, to the Jews, the beginning of the year was fall. But this was written by a Levite, a priest, Ezekiel. And we have no doubt that he would take the biblical reckoning of time rather than the Jewish civil method. So this was happening in the month of Abib, and it was on the 10th day of that month. Now, I don't know if there is any particular significance to this, but anciently there was something that would, take place on that day. Namely, the Passover lamb was selected and separated until the 4 days later when it would be killed. Now, I don't know if there is any significance here related to that, but I just want to point it out. In any case, this is the time just before the Passover. So at that time, Ezekiel was taken by God to Jerusalem. But keep in mind, brethren, that the city was destroyed at this time. The temple was destroyed at this particular time as well. Yet, here was Ezekiel in spirit in Jerusalem. Now, obviously, he is carried far forward, as far as the time is concerned, to the millennial period, you see. It could be even later than millennial period, so we might say it was perhaps even further than millennium, meaning that it can either be the millennium or the judgment period that follows the millennium. So sometime during that time, Ezekiel is in vision. So in the vision of God, he came to the land of Israel, and when Ezekiel was there, it was called the land of Judah. Verse 2. In the visions of God, he took me into the land of Israel and set me on a very high mountain. On it toward the south was something like the structure of a city. So Ezekiel was taken to Israel and set on mountains looking to the south. Verse 3, he took me there, and behold, there was a man whose appearance was like the appearance of bronze. He had a line of flax and a measuring rod in his hand, and he stood in the gateway. And the man said to me, Son of man, look with your eyes, and hear with your ears, and fix your mind on everything I'll show you. For you were brought here so that I might show them to you. Declare to the house of Israel everything you see. So you see, Ezekiel was told to tell this to the house of Israel. And again, the house of Israel at that time, and even to this day, is still the 10 tribes of Israel. Verse 5. Now there was a wall all around the outside of the temple. In the man's hand was a measuring rod 6 cubits long, each being a cubit and a hand breadth. And he measured the width of the wall structure 1 rod, and the height 1 rod. So you see, there was a wall around this area that looked like a city, and there was a man with a measuring rod. And Ezekiel here poses to emphasize or to explain that this is a different cubit than it is commonly known. He says it is a cubit and a hand breadth. Now there are many, mentions of the cubit measure historically, especially in ancient times. And for that matter also, as far as the Bible is concerned, cubit is mentioned in, for example, in 2 Chronicles chapter 3 verse 3. So Ezekiel uses ancient measures with a change in measurement standards. Cubit in captivity was shorter than one at the time of kings, which were a hand breadth longer. And there are several lengths of cubits. But this particular one, he says it was a cubit and a hand breadth. So it is a breadth of the hand. This particular distance is considered to be 3.6 inches, or for you who are adjusted to European measures, it was about 9 centimeters. So there was a cubit that was known, but this one was a bit longer than that. Cubit was known as the length of forearm to tip of fingers. Handbreadth is width of palm. Now this was written during captivity of Israel. In any case, brethren, we can conclude that this particular cubit, which is also a cubit according to the ancient measure of which we read in Chronicles, was the 7 hand breadths. It would also seem logical that down in Babylon they use 6 and that God uses 7. Now, those figures might possibly have other significance. Relationship between day for year, and that is that those are both figures that we are very familiar with. 360 and 2520. So this seems to possibly have relationship to this. Now this is roughly 2 feet. It is a little over 2 feet. It is 1.2 inches longer than 2 feet. And 6 cubits, that is 12 feet. So this man has a rod now that is 12 feet long, and he now goes around measuring things with this rod. And that sort of gives us an idea of the sizes that he is talking about. So, what is 12 feet thick? Well, the wall is 12 feet thick, and the height of the wall was 12 feet. And as far as gates are concerned, we have 3 inner and 3 outer gates. Verse 6. Then he went to the gateway which faced east, and he went up its stairs and measured the threshold of the gateway, which was 1 rod wide, and the other threshold was 1 rod wide. So you see there are 6 gates that are mentioned, and this is East Gate. And what he does is he takes us basically on this tour of this millennial temple, and he enters through the East Gate. He also went upstairs. Later on we'll find how many steps there are. There are 7 steps leading up to that particular gate, and both thresholds were of the same thickness as the wall. So wall is thick 12 feet. Now there are also 6 chambers, 3 on each side, and there are 60 cubits, which is over 120 feet high, which would be about 36.5 meters. Verse 7. Each gate chamber was 1 rod long and 1 rod wide. Between the gate chambers was a space of 5 cubits, and the threshold of the gateway by the vestibula of the inside gate was 1 rod. He also measured the vestibula of the inside gate 1 rod. Then he measured the vestibula of the gateway 8 cubits, and the gate posts 2 cubits. The vestibula of the gate was on the inside. In the eastern gateway were 3 gate chambers on one side and 3 on the other. The 3 were all the same size. Also the gate posts were of the same size on this side and that side. He measured the width of the entrance to the gateway 10 cubits, and the length of the gate 13 cubits. There was a space in front of the gate chambers, 1 cubit on this side and 1 cubit on that side. The gate chambers were 6 cubits on this side and 6 cubits on that side. Then he measured the gateway from the roof of one gate chamber to the roof of the other. The width was 25 cubits as door faces door. He measured the gate posts 60 cubits high, and the court all around the gateway extended to the gate posts. From the front of the entrance gate to the front of the vestibule of the inner gate was 50 cubits. There were beveled window frames in the gate chambers and in their intervening archways on the inside of the gateway all around, and likewise in the vestibules. There were windows all around on the inside, and on each gate post were palm trees. Then he brought me into the outer court, and there were chambers and a pavement made all around the court. 30 chambers faced the pavement. So here in verse 17 starts the description of the outer court, and it runs all the way to verse 24. Verse 17 describes courtyard with 30 chambers, and that is East Gate. Verse 20 describes north gate. Verse 24 describes the south gate. In the inner gate to north, animal sacrifices were being prepared, by the way. Verse 18, the payment was by the side of the gateways, corresponding to the length of the gateways. That was the lower payment. Then he measured the width from the front of the lower gateway to the front of the inner court exterior, 100 cubits toward the east and the north. On the outer court was also a gateway facing north, and he measured its length and its width. So now he's, talking about the northern gate. So now we have all this repeated over again, in some cases almost word for word. Verse 21. Its gate chambers, 3 on this side and 3 on that side, its gate posts and its archways had the same measurements as the first gate. Its length was 50 cubits and width 25 cubits. Its windows and those of its archways and also its palm trees had the same measurements as the gateway facing east. It was ascended by 7 steps, and its archway was in front of it. So in this verse 22, we note one important point. It was ascended by 7 steps. Verse 23, a gate of the inner court was opposite the northern gateway, just as the eastern gateway. And he measured from gateway to gateway 100 cubits. After that he brought me toward the south, and there a gateway was facing south. And he measured its gate posts and archways according to these same measurements. There were windows in it and in its archways all around like those windows. Its length was 50 cubits and its width 25 cubits. 7 steps led up to it, and its archway was in front of them. And it had palm trees on its gate posts, 1 on this side and 1 on that side. There was also a gateway on the inner court facing south, and he measured from gateway to gateway toward the south 100 cubits. Then he brought me to the inner court through the southern gateway. He measured the southern gateway according to these same measurements. Now he's, talking about another series of gates. These are now in reverse direction. The porch here is turned inside. These others are turned around directly in opposite direction. Now the porch is toward the outside instead of the inside. They are reversed. So the measures, the south gate according to these measures are described, so Ezekiel, I wanted to say, he measures the south gate according to these measures, and then he describes, of course, that which he is measuring. Verse 29. Also, its gate chambers, its gate posts, and its archways were according to these same measurements. There were windows in it and in its archways all around. It was 50 cubits long and 25 cubits wide. There were archways all around, 25 cubits long and 5 cubits wide. Its archways faced the outer court. Palm trees were on its gate posts, and going up to it were 8 steps. So when you go to the inner court, there are 8 steps. Verse 32, and he brought me into the inner court facing east. He measured the gateway according to these same measurements. Also its gate chambers, its gate posts, and its archways were according to these same measurements. And there were windows in it and in its archways all around. It was 50 cubits long and 25 cubits wide. Its archways faced the outer court, and palm trees were on its gate posts on this side and on that side. And going up to it were 8 steps. And now, in the next 2 verses, 35 and 36, he's talking about the inner court. Verse 35. Then he brought me to the north gateway and measured it according to these same measurements. Also its gate chambers, its gate posts, and its archways. It had windows all around. Its length was 50 cubits and its width 25 cubits. Verse 37. Its gate posts faced the outer court. Palm trees were on its gate posts, on this side and on that side, and going up to it were 8 steps. So you see, when he talks about these inner gates, the gate posts are facing outside. Now we are in verse 38. There was a chamber and its entrance by the gateposts of the gateway, where they washed the burnt offering. You see, this is at the north inner gate, where the burnt offering was to be washed. So this is a new section, we might say, starting in verse 38 and running all the way to verse 46, in which it is described where the animals were prepared for the sacrifice. It gives quite some detail about it. Verse 39, in the vestibula of the gateway were 2 tables on this side and 2 tables on that side, on which to slay the burnt offering, the sin offering, and the trespass offering. Now, the details of the place where the animals were prepared for sacrifice, it tells us that there were 2 tables on this side and 2 tables on that side. So when you go through that particular gate, there are 2 tables on both sides. That is where they slay, the burnt offering and the sin offering and the trespass offering. Verse 40. At the outer side of the vestibula, as one goes up to the entrance of the northern gateway, were 2 tables. And on the other side of the vestibula of the gateway were 2 tables. 4 tables were on this side and 4 tables on that side. By the side of the gateway, 8 tables on which they slaughtered the sacrifices. There were also 4 tables of hewn stone for the burnt offering, 1 cubit and a half long, 1 cubit and a half wide, and 1 cubit high. On these they laid the instruments with which they slaughtered the burnt offering and the sacrifice. Inside were hooks, a handbreadth wide, fastened all around, and the flesh of the sacrifices was on the tables. Outside the inner gate were the chambers for the singers in their inner court, one facing south at the side of the northern gateway, and the other facing north at the side of the southern gateway. So you see, this is to the side of the north gate. So there were other chambers that were to the side, and they faced they faced south. Verse 45. You see, I'm getting, with these mathematical measures, I'm somewhat, distraught, and I get confused. I have never really understood all of these constructions. To me, it's all just so abstract. But anyway, this is still God's Word. It's part of the Bible, so we need to read it and we need to understand it as best as we can. It's verse 45. Then he said to me, this chamber, which faces south, is for the priests who have charge of the temple. So you see verse 45 and verse 46, they describe singers, that is those in charge of temple building. An altar is located here. Verse 46, the chamber, which faces north, is for the priests who have charge of the altar. These are the sons of Zadok from the sons of Levi, who come near the Lord to minister to him. Now, brethren, anciently in the time of King David, there were 2 priestly families. One was the family of Abiathar, and the other was the family of Zadok. Now, in the biblical record of David, we find that Abiathar was not faithful, but the family of Zadok was. As a result of that, and maybe there is a later fulfillment of this, but at least as the result of one family remaining faithful and the other not, now God says that the sons of Zadok are the ones that are going to come to God to minister to him because of that faithfulness, you see. Verse 47, and he measured the court, 100 cubits long and 100 cubits wide, 4 square. The altar was in front of the temple. Now, it is about 200 feet in each direction. It would be like 61 meter. So this is talking about the area of the inner court out in front of the temple building. Verse 48. Then he brought me to the vestibula of the temple and measured the doorposts of the vestibula, 5 cubits on this side and 5 cubits on that side. And the width of the gateway was 3 cubits on this side and 3 cubits on that side. So now we are getting, to the temple building itself. So he entered through the east gate, and then he walked to the north gate and the south gate. And then he went around to the north gate, inner gate, north inner gate, and then he finds himself in the inner court. And now we are approaching the temple itself. And most descriptions that we find in the book of Ezekiel describe the horizontal dimension. In order to understand these measures and descriptions, if we really want to understand them, we would need to study Solomon's temple, you see. We find quite the details of that temple in Kings and also in Chronicles. We find some things about it in the book of Jeremiah. We find a bit description in the next temple, which might be very enlightening in the book of Ezra. Verse 49. The length of the vestibule was 20 cubits and the width 11 cubits, and by the steps which led to it there were pillars by the doorposts, one on this side and another on that side. So you see, when we read about Solomon's temple, there is one particular difference regarding this building itself. There is one dimension that is different. In the description of the Solomon's temple, brethren, there are 10 cubits mentioned as the width of the vestibule instead of 11. Now that is rather strange that everything else is the same, yet that particular measure differs. And when you add up all the measures, cubits, of the porch, the Solomon's temple has 70 cubits. Now Ezekiel's temple has 71 cubits. Now why is it 71? Well, we don't have the exact answer, brethren, but we can wonder if this is symbolic of time. Because 20 and 20 and 20 are 60, and 10 making a total of 70. But there is 71 cubits altogether in Ezekiel's temple. If we add a couple of zeros, we get 7,000 or 7,100. So we wonder if it has to do with the fact that the judgment is going to last for 100 years following the millennium. There are 6,000 years, and then another 1,000 years, which is 7,000, and then 100 after that. You see, Solomon's temple operated in a different time, and it was 1 cubit less. Now, I don't know if that is what God had in mind at all, so this is just a possibility. And there were also pillars, each on the side. In Solomon's time, there were also 2 pillars called Joachim and Boaz. We don't know their exact relation to the house. It only says that they were outside.